Thank you very much indeed, Tony. Very, very good summary. The only thing I would change is, and I didn't manage to get into Tony before he published his strategy, is that maybe we should have had the route to tomorrow's low carbon journeys, because that's really what we're here about, and one of the key areas. And for the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership, we were really pleased to actually work with the MCIA on this, and I'll cover a little bit of the background. So. If you like, my piece, my presentation is about this being an untapped opportunity. Our role within this ecosystem is to try and accelerate the uptake of lower carbon vehicles and fuels and really push that forward. And this sector, this L category sector, and we laboured long and hard over what we should call this sector and ended up with powered light vehicles, but this L category sector is very much one of the opportunities that we believe hasn't yet been tapped and represents a huge potential for the UK, both industrially and in terms of its carbon opportunities. For those that don't know us, the Low Carbon Vehicle Partnership is actually a consortium, a membership organisation, part funded by government, by our friends in the DFT, and we try and bring all of the stakeholders together around the same table, and if I can colloquially, we try and reach the parts of policy that others can't reach. We try and get in there and work with the details, try and understand how we can leverage all of the potential to actually accelerate the market. So we're very fortunate to have academics, fuel companies, automotive manufacturers, the environmental NGOs, government, all around that same table. And that's what allows us to try and grapple with some of these subjects in a very holistic way. And the focus that we have in terms of the key challenges is actually around the low carbon, the greenhouse gas impacts, and of course on air quality. So those are the two primary areas that we're interested in, and the areas that we focus on for all of our work. And as you can see, we've got a big challenge facing us. When we originally were looking through this, we were talking about an 80% reduction, the original Climate Change Act. As you know, I haven't seen the news in the last half hour, but the net zero regulation is on its way through Parliament. So we will be talking about a zero carbon transport system being legislated within the UK. And that poses both a challenge but a huge opportunity for us as a sector to try and do things in the right way and actually steer the whole process. From our perspective, we do have policies and lots of activity in most of the areas of transport. We've got grants, we've got structures, we've got all sorts of support for cars, trucks, buses, a lot of activity in buses and low carbon buses. Trains, obviously, a lot of them are already low carbon electrically driven. And we even have now a low carbon, a grant for motorcycles, power two-wheeler motorcycles. The gap in our policy portfolio is really around this L category sector. There's a big gap there. It's almost untapped in terms of looking at the opportunities from a low carbon opportunity. What we have got is a lot of strategies. We are not short of strategies when it comes to government perspective. And I think within all of these, transport actually is right in the heart of many of these strategies, whether it's the carbon agenda, the clean growth agenda. The Road to Zero is clearly a focus on the broad range of strategies. We've obviously got clean air and, of course, the future of urban mobility. So we are not short of strategies and we're not short of focus on transport. So with this backdrop, at the LowCVP, probably embarrassingly, 4 years ago, I think, we saw that this was an opportunity for the sector and we wanted to try and stimulate some activity. And what we did in that space was actually invite seven universities to work together and bring them together, all with different expertise, and start to grapple with some of the challenges that this sector faces. I'm pleased there are some of the representatives here today, but I stand here slightly embarrassed that it's taken this long to get to where we are today. And I think it's absolutely fortuitous that we've now got an industry body that is right on the same page. And that's really why we're launching this today, that we now have an opportunity to take that academic rigour and thinking that's been gestating for some time and actually apply it to deliver something more tangible. So that's really what we're trying to do today. And on that basis, we've launched our summary report of all of that work that's gone on over a number of years to try and highlight where we think the opportunities are within this space. As I said, I think one of the key things is that this is a forgotten sector. And we do move, as Tony said, we move from the focus on healthy, active travel and public transport straight to electric cars. And it's almost that polar, if you like, that binary choice that consumers are being given. L category are very, very rarely mentioned in most of the policies that we have. Within the Clean Air Zone framework, they are a bit of also ran that you can consider motorbikes in your Clean Air Zone. I think I'm right in saying that London is the only area that has actually looked at motorcycles specifically in terms of their clean air strategy and implementing something. As we said, in the grants and incentives, I worked on, I'm not sure whether Bob's here, but I worked with Bob Moran some time ago around the powered two-wheeler grants and things. And at that time, we were aware that there weren't really any robust products that we wanted to support in the larger L categories that really set the standard. But now, as you can see, those products are available, and we need to be thinking about how we encourage the uptake. And we've also got to think about L category with our infrastructure. We do a lot of work around the electric vehicle infrastructure. As was mentioned earlier, there's 18,000 public charging points. We need to make sure that those are all accessible to this sector as well as to all the cars that we're putting on the road as well. And within the incentivisation, as I mentioned, and I won't cover this, but we've got grants. We've got grants for motorbikes, for cars, for vans, for taxis, for buses, for trucks. We've even got grants for e-cargo bikes. There's money swilling around for e-cargo bikes, but nothing for the other sectors within L category. So there's a big gap there, and we believe that should be filled quite urgently. I think what we are seeing is really encouraging, is that there is an acceptance and an understanding and a realisation that this has a role, and that realisation within government. And we've seen a number of strategies and the call for evidence which specifically mention, in this case they call it micro vehicles, and I think this is where we, Tony and I, have really got to challenge the industry to pick on a single moniker. Powered light vehicles is what we're using now, so we want to try and get that into the psyche because micro vehicles, micro mobility can start to confuse people. But it is starting to emerge into this sector. And I think a couple of key points. One of the reasons that we're so interested in this is the energy efficiency. There's no doubt that electrification of transport is one of the biggest games, one of the biggest tools that we've got in our box to decarbonise transport overall. But probably not a lot of people know that when you get to an electric vehicle, like a Tesla, Model 3 Tesla, great vehicle, probably 50%, more than 50% of its overall carbon impact is actually in building it. With the grid that we've got here in the UK, the focus has got to move away from the tailpipe, because we're not getting any carbon out of the tailpipe of an electric vehicle, but we get a significant amount of energy and embedded carbon in the build of that vehicle. So the bigger the battery, the greater your impact. And if you've got 100 kilowatt hours of battery that you've got to drag around for your 100,000 miles, that's actually a pretty significant carbon impact. And when we start talking about things like net zero, we're talking about the complete life cycle impact of vehicles. And this is where light, efficient, inherently engineered vehicles that use efficient techniques, efficient production, and therefore efficient energy use, that's got to be where we focus our activity, and this sector provides that opportunity. Around about 75% reduction, not only in the energy consumption, but also in the embedded energy, can be achieved in this sector. And those are the sorts of scales that we need to be looking at. In terms of the overall opportunities, we clearly see this huge opportunity around this sector, as Tony said, and I won't go into lots of detail there, but as Tony's mentioned, there is also the potential for unintended consequences, and we, as an industry, have to think about that, about how we avoid those unintended consequences. We do want to encourage people to walk and cycle and use public transport and get them out of their motor cars and into an L category vehicle rather than out off their bicycle and into an L category vehicle. So we have to think about this very carefully to avoid displacing the wrong things. But if we think about it correctly and we all work together, I think that's perfectly feasible. So my call, if you like, today is really that we galvanise and we mobilise the government ecosystem. We have a really, really good ecosystem, and this is a slide that we put together a couple of years ago for the LCV show that really highlights the range of support that the government actually provides the automotive and transport sector, right from blue sky research with the EPSRC, all the way through Innovate, our colleagues at the Advanced Propulsion Centre, I think some of them are here today. Obviously, we have OLEV, and I know OLEV are here, and the DFT, and CCAV as a support for the connected vehicles, and then people like the LowCVP really supporting towards the end of that market. That system, I think, is one of the strengths of the UK. What we need is that system to be supporting this sector and thinking about this sector as a piece of the jigsaw. So that's my call, if you like, for society today. And really, it's about grasping that opportunity. It's about, let's look at the policies. Let's make sure that we've got the right research and incentives all going on, and we actually recognise those policy opportunities. Let's look at the industrial strategy. We had the business minister here today, and there's a great opportunity for the UK in terms of building these vehicles and the trials of them and joining up with the connected vehicle agenda. Let's make sure we've got the right regulations. If there is any sort of opportunity within Brexit, it's actually that we have the opportunity to steer our own regulations a little bit further and maybe design those regulations better than the current existing European ones in a way that enhances this sector. And then one of the final points, and probably one of the most important, and it's at this point I'll hand over to Richard, is about public awareness. We have this challenge in terms of getting people to understand what they're buying. They all recognise a motorbike and they recognise a car. They don't necessarily recognise these things in between. So in those larger L category sectors, we need that public awareness of the opportunities, what they're buying, and what the safety and the requirements are in terms of operating them. So overall, I believe that this sector and what we're doing today, what Tony's launching and our engagement with this is an opportunity to win-win-win across a number of areas. But I think it's probably best that I hand over to Richard Barrett, who will maybe talk about those opportunities in terms of the public perception a little bit further. Thank you.